Hi everyone, it's Brian Walker, CEO and founder of Retail Doctor Group. As you know, we bring to our listeners the Future of Retail podcast series. I'm personally always so interested in this, and to bring in industry luminaries who are able to share their vision, their thinking around the future. And of course, one of those luminaries that I'm delighted to have with us today is Martin Newman, customer champion, incredible focus both on the present day retail and the future. And so all the way, in the morning in London, is it, Martin?
It is the morning. It's Monday morning, Brian, as we're recording this. Whose idea was it to do a podcast on Monday morning? I don't know, honestly.
Well, I know you're versatile. So, Martin, do you mind spending a couple of moments and just tell us a little bit about yourself? And
Sure.
You've worked with some remarkable companies.
Sure. Thank you very much, Brian. And first of all, thank you for your kind words and also for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, I've been working for 42 fairly long years. Some days it feels longer than others. As you can see, I'm not a spring chicken. I've been around. I started my career working on the shop floor of my father's retail optical practices in Glasgow. Fast forward, I've been a marketing director for a couple of big brands in the sports industry. I launched one of the first transactional websites in retail in the UK in 1997 when I was working in sports retailing. I then had a go at my first business, which did well for a couple of years. And then when the dot-com crashed and burned, so did my business. I had a web development company, but I learned from those lessons and that proved to be successful further down the line, which I'll talk about in a second. I kind of lost my confidence at that point. I thought maybe I'm not an entrepreneur and I'll go back to my career. And I was living in Glasgow at the time in Scotland, and I really always wanted to come to London. And eventually I landed a role to come to London and head up home shopping at Harrods. And I got the job because I had not only an e-commerce background, but also a direct mail and direct marketing background. And catalogues were a big part of Harrods' distance out-of-store sales back in 2004. So that got me down to London, and I basically I did the same job at Harrods, Pentland Brands, Burberry, and Ted Baker was Burberry's first head of online. So I was quite an early sort of pioneer into the world of e-com and did lots of things for the first time, including live chat, which I implemented in 2007, the endless aisle as well, which I didn't know it was called that. I don't think anybody had given it that label. Was always an early adopter of technology as well, but always from the point of view of putting the customer at the heart of everything we do, and that's always been the most important thing that I focus on. If you fast forward very quickly, 2009, I started a business called 𝗪𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁, which some of your listeners might have heard of. Grew it successfully over 10 years to 100 people. We had offices in London, Dubai, Hong Kong, Guangzhou in China, and Sydney and Melbourne in Australia. Hence, I love Australia. It's like a second home to me. I have been to your beautiful shores 27 times. Coming back later this year, I really should be an honorary citizen by now.
You should be.
And I got lucky and I sold 𝗪𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁 in 2018 and did okay, still waiting for Pattern, the company that bought us, to do their IPO sometime, hopefully. That'll be my pension locked up. And today I kind of do three things. I'm a board advisor, I'm an educator, I write books and deliver workshops, and I have a kind of media bucket. I do a lot of keynotes and that type of thing, which is probably some of the ways that we've come across each other over the years. So there's a bit about my background.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And, I know that as a customer specialist, this will be the center point of what we'll talk about today, being the future of retail, Martin. It's so fascinating to see this early e-com pioneering experience of yours. And as you sort of start to warm up to this, where do you see customers in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, tech-enabled, the role of the shop. Will we see many more changes, or do you think we've seen a lot?
I think we will continue to see a lot of changes, and a lot of that will be driven by AI. So I think what will really happen in the next 5-10 years, probably the biggest shift, will be the fact that retailers will finally be able to deliver a much deeper level of personalization across all the channels and touch points. I mean, here we are today in 2025, and we've been talking about personalization. I first heard personalization as a term in 1999. It was about the same time as CRM. And when I fast forward to here 25, 26 years later, you know, how often do we buy something, right, or engage with a brand and have any real level of personalization? It really doesn't exist in a meaningful way across the industry. But we're starting to see that change now. So I think for me, that's probably the biggest fundamental shift. And technology, obviously, driven by AI, will be at the heart of that. And that could be anything from obviously personalized communication, personalized or customized products, which I think we'll see a lot more of, and just consumers controlling really the whole experience. And that really is what it's all about. And to be honest with you, that shift has already taken place. You know, if you go back if you go back to 1994, which was the first transaction online, right? You could argue that up until that point, or even up until the late 90s, early 2000s, as consumers, we didn't really have the power, right? The power sat with the retailer, because the retailer, we didn't have nearly as many options or choices available to us. And really, the internet has changed all of that, because now that proliferation of choice means that if we have a bad experience with one brand, we've got thousands of options, right? Just a few taps of our fingers away on our mobile phones. So as consumers, we're empowered, but I don't think we have that level of true empowerment yet that we're looking for. And I think that's the thing that will fundamentally change in the next 5 to 10 years, probably.
It's so interesting. And I listen to you, Martin, I think to myself, one of the great changes in the landscape has been the role of technology driving the big businesses like the Amazons, to some recent degrees, the Temus, the Sheins, the direct-to-consumer, you know, the data-based companies that, you know, do they have a head start on personalization is probably one of the questions. And I accept that that's unscripted, so bear with me. But
No, it's fine. Well, I think to the point that, I mean, they have a head start in the context that if you're starting a business today, or if you've started a business in the last 5 years in the way that Shein has, right, you have the advantage of not having legacy, right? So the challenge that our established big retailers have, if we take, you know, all the multitude of brands in Australia, like the Myers and the David Jones and, you know, all the Country Roads, all the existing players in the market, the challenge any of those businesses have is they've got legacy, right? They've got legacy technology, they've got legacy systems, they've got legacy processes. Sometimes they have legacy people,
debt in some cases.
Right? Legacy what, sorry?
Debt in some cases, you know, exactly. That they've already got pretty full balance sheets.
Yes, exactly, legacy debt. So there's lots of things that ultimately you're facing into, and transforming a business like that is not easy. First of all, you've got to have the vision of what good looks like. And I'm not convinced that a lot of people that are running our retail businesses today, sorry to say, necessarily have that. Or, to be fair to them, maybe what the issue is, that they're being focused too much by the shareholders on what happens in the short term and not being given the opportunity to actually plan longer term. And I think that's an issue that we face in retail as well. So the advantage that the Sheins and the Temus and any of those other, you know, web-first businesses, digital-first businesses have, is they don't have all that legacy. So they're able to make very different decisions.
Yeah, you know, if I think through that a little bit further, the other sort of trend that I think is starting to emerge is that, of course, we've always thought about retail channels and chains, networks, you know, being 50 to 100 to 150 years in tenure. And there are many great examples globally. But I'm starting to see a faster turnover of retail brands, and perhaps by design, that the customer is more faddish, quick, spontaneous, wants brand new, fresh innovation, probably more so because we live in a much greater environment of instant gratification, and technology brings that.
Yeah,
that's do you think that's changing as well?
Well, I think if you think, not necessarily, but I think if you think about the fact that that we're not in this world of deeply personalized experiences yet, what that means is, for most of the businesses that we buy from, there isn't nearly we're not communicated with or given as many reasons why we should keep coming back, right? So loyalty, I've heard people stand on stage and say that loyalty is dead. I don't think loyalty necessarily ever really was there. I think it can be there, but I think brands have to work harder to give consumers reasons why they should keep coming back to them. So there's no reason why you couldn't be a well-established business like some of the ones that I mentioned earlier in Australia or anywhere else around the world. You could be a legacy business as long as you can create an ecosystem and have that greater agility and ability to react and deliver the more personalized experiences for customers. Then I think you can create lasting and meaningful loyalty, because consumers, whilst they may be looking for instant gratification, they're also looking for a good deal. They're also looking for value, and they're also looking for, I think they want to have relationships. I think that's kind of integral, or not integral. I think it's an inherent part of being a human being. We like to have relationships. We're sociable people. We're social, social animals. And I think if retailers can do a better job of understanding that and giving us more reasons to want to come back. And for me, loyalty is more than just a points program. I don't think a points program in its own is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, inviting people along to events. I'm talking about, sending me content that relates to the stuff that I'm interested in and the things I've maybe bought before, or sending me, talking to me about new products or services that also relate to things I've told you I'm interested in. We don't do a good enough job of any of those kind of basic table stakes right now. So there's a lot to get after that I think would change things.
Yeah, I think there's some really great points there. I want to form a little hypothesis for you, and it's to do with the future of technology, augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse, wearable tech, the role of the platform e-commerce distributors. And that is the fundamental shift in retail, as it is in education, and I know that you're a guest MBA lecturer, is that technology has become front and center, or will become front and center. In other words, it will underpin at a much greater ratio and role than ever before going forward. So we would use technology historically for management reporting, for example, but now it's driving personalization, different realities, machine learning, and somewhere in all this, that whole value chain starts to change somewhat. Is that reasonable?
I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. Yes, of course. I mean, I think that, as technology advances, the more that there's more and more that we can do with it. And of course, AI is at the forefront of that. But the thing with technology is, if you look throughout history, businesses that have done really well by leveraging technology are the ones who've understood, what are the problems they need to solve. So if you look at all the disruptive brands that are around today and have been around for the last 5 years, from Amazon to Uber to Deliveroo to in the banking industry, particularly over here, we have a lot of the neobanks, the online only banks like Monzo, Revolut, Starling banks, all these different disruptive brands, Airbnb, right? None of them, I guarantee you, none of them started with thinking about technology. They all started by understanding there was a problem with the experience as consumers we had in each of those sectors. And then they thought about how can we possibly create a solution using different types of technology to empower customers. So I think when you come at it from a point of view of empowerment, that for me is the starting point, because once you understand what that looks like, and that's where personalization comes in, then you can do an infinitely better job. So that's the starter for me. And I think the only other thing I would say, or caveat I would add, I mean, technology obviously is, and AI, of course, is forefront and phenomenal. I mean, I use it every day now, right? ChatGPT and everything else. I use multitude of solutions now. I'm more or less a one-man band now, but I become like a small business with all these AI assistants that I'm using in different areas. That's what I feel like. It's quite remarkable.
I think that's very relevant, because one of the other topics related to this is, the future of organizations.
Yes.
And, a little bit linked to this idea of what will the future retail organization look like? Behavioral scientists, coders, robotics, chatbots,
Well, look,
So
there's no question that AI is increasingly going to play an important role. And I'm sure over time there will be some roles that ultimately will be replaced by AI. But for me, I think there's always going to be a hybrid required, right? I'm a great believer in it's not just about consumer or customer centricity, it's about human centricity. And I'm a human centrist. And I think that you need that balance. And I'm sure there'll come a point in time, we've been talking about, I mean, I was going to say to you earlier when I was talking about technology, we always overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but we underestimate its impact in the long term.
yes,
Now,
yes.
you talk briefly about the metaverse, for example. It's a great example. If you go back sort of 2.5 years ago, before all the noise about AI, which really started kicking off around about September, October 2023 or thereabouts. Before that, it was all about the metaverse. You don't hear anything about that at the moment. But is the metaverse going to be a thing? Are we going to have this parallel digital world, which it was intended to be or perceived to be? Yes, I'm pretty confident we will. But it's just going to take a lot longer than anybody imagined to get there. But once we get
Yes.
there and we look back, it'll be much greater and more significant than we probably ever realized. And I think it's the same. I think it's the same with AI. But what I don't think retailers or maybe and other brands are doing as well as they might at the moment, when I talk to the people I work with, I think we're still mainly looking at AI in a tactical sense. So we're seeing tactical opportunities in marketing or other parts of the business that we can use it. For me, you made a great point about the value chain. I'd be looking across the whole value chain of the business and the whole operating model. And at each point, I'd be thinking about what's the opportunity for AI? Is it to drive sales and demand? Is it to improve efficiencies? Is it to cut costs? And it might be that all three are relevant, or it might be that just one or two in certain areas. I think then you can start to plan potentially longer term and say, well, what does that mean? How do we need to change? What's the impact of that on our capabilities, on our infrastructure, on our people, on our solutions, on our experience? And how do we start to map that out in the short, medium, and long term? So that's how I would approach it. I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but I think when you think about it more holistically, then you can start to see and answer maybe the question that you're talking about there in terms of what impact might it have on roles and responsibilities within an organization.
Well, an excellent answer. And I'm sort of starting to move towards the end of this session, but already I want to invite you back to another one.
Sure.
I'm not sure that I'll be around to see this happen, but do you ever foresee into the future, and let's have a bit of fun with this, that we step into our driverless car. There's no such thing as a car park in a shopping centre because they become redundant. We move into this environment where there really isn't inventory there. There's some sample stock, but it's much more a social environment. It's almost going back to the community in that sense. We're served by very efficient, well-spoken, literate robots who look very human. We have an amazing time in our local community. And then we take our driverless car home. Or we go to the metaverse and have the whole environment created in our living room. Fanciful?
No, I think that's a pretty good piece of futurology there, Brian. I think that's a pretty good stab at what might happen at some point in the future. I think you and I'm not 100% sure if we're the same age. I'm thinking we're similar ages. But either way, I agree with you. I'm not sure either of us will be around to see that in its totality. I think the driverless vehicles we will definitely see, and I think we're likely to see them if you look at what's happening at the moment with driverless taxis in San Francisco and California and everything else, and the development that's going on there. I'd be surprised if we don't see those on our roads in 5 years' time. We might see them sooner, as in driverless cars, not just driverless taxis.
Yes, and I agree with that.
Yeah, so you sort of 2030 or just before, possibly. I can see that happening, absolutely. I can see us being served by robots in the next 5 to 10 years, probably not in the next 3, 5 to 10, definitely. But I don't see robots replacing human beings in the short term. I see it being a hybrid. And I'd hate to think, I really would hate to think that they replace human beings entirely. And I'd like to think it would be a hybrid model of some description. The stores having no inventory, there's already some examples around the world of that. So that's entirely feasible. And certainly, you know, retail, we talked about experiential retail. Retail has to be a more interesting and more engaging environment, right? Because if it's not, why would you bother going there in the first place? So
That's right.
I can certainly see it becoming more social, and I see a lot of that happening in the probably in the shorter term. So AR and VR playing a bigger role in the next 5 years.
Yes.
Retailers focusing more on how do we leverage that to create better in-store experiences. And then from that point on, yeah, who knows? I don't know that some of the bigger department stores and brands like that, will they ever be completely inventory free? I'm not sure. It'd probably be some kind of hybrid model, again, where you would have a certain amount of stock or a certain amount of samples. You might not buy them in the physical environment. You know, you might place an order, and by the time you've got home, it's already been delivered.
Yeah,
right?
well, we're starting to see that. And some would say, Martin, that, you know, the department store itself as a concept is quite threatened. And we're already seeing some early signs of that.
Sure.
But I think the other thing too is this whole idea of product. So at the moment, we go shopping largely for commoditized product that we call groceries or general merchandise. But I think I see the day when time as a currency will become increasingly important. And frankly, shopping will be for higher value merchandise, and the lower value merchandise will increasingly be the domain of these sort of businesses that are fulfillment, personalization, subscription businesses.
Yeah.
As society gets more time pressured, cost of living increases, all the variables. And also as society gets older, which it is.
Speak for yourself, Brian. Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I can't escape that, Martin. There's a few things I can escape. Unfortunately, that's not one of them. Martin, thank you very much for today. And can I also applaud you for a Monday morning? You know, you've really done well.
Bad.
And I'm looking forward to our next session as well. So everyone who's listening, delighted to have Martin Newman with us on Future of Retail series. I mean, what's so wonderful about Martin is he steeps deep in the tradition of retailing, which ultimately doesn't change, but with it comes vision and foresight and some wonderful experience.
Thank you for having me. Can I just sign off with one thing? I have a new book coming out in probably somewhere between 2 and 4 months.
Yes.
And the working title, it might change, but the working title is ROI Reimagined. So I've got this framework for a whole lot of different ROIs, which you can maybe talk about another time, which I think are better and more efficient ways of thinking about what we should be investing in and how those might have an impact in helping us create a more sustainably successful business in the future. But look, I'd love to come on again, and thanks for having me.
Would love to do that, and let's talk on that topic because that will be invaluable.
Sure.
Compliments, and thank you again, Martin.
My pleasure. Thank you.